Hi, I'm Dave Van Oss, Agricultural Markets Manager for Libro Credit Union. Libro is very excited to be this year's presenting sponsor for the virtual Outdoor Farm Show. We truly hope that your farm business finds great value with this upcoming session.
Hi, I'm Laura Rance, Vice President of Content for Glacier FarmMedia. Welcome to this special series of conversations around the future of food in the pandemic era. Today I'm joined by Evan Fraser, Director of the Arrell Institute at the University of Guelph. Hi Evan, thanks for joining us at Canada's Digital Farm Show.
Hi Laura, thanks for the phone call.
You know, generally, I think we looking back, we could have predicted something like this would happen. And in fact, the agricultural sector has been very, very focused on preventing animal diseases from sweeping into Canada and in pandemic. But this really caught us by surprise. And I'm just wondering, generally speaking, how do you think the industry and the food system has adapted to this?
Well, boy, we've learned a lot about our food system in the last 6 or so months, haven't we? It's been a heck of a ride. And I guess the first thing I say is a huge thank you to all of the folks working on the front line of the food system, whether they're driving a tractor or running an abattoir or stocking a grocery store shelves or whatnot. A tremendous amount of ingenuity, hard work, tireless energy efforts have gone into keeping our food system pretty intact for the last 6 months, despite an amazing set of shocks. So first of all, a profound sense of gratitude from me to anybody who's listening, who's participated in keeping me fed and my family fed for the last few months. And in no way to undermine the accomplishment, the pandemic has kicked up a number of very serious problems in our food system, and they're not particularly problems that should have caught us by surprise, I don't think. It has revealed things that many of us, almost all of us, I would say, have known were problematic in our food system beforehand, and yet have emerged as weaknesses. So the issue of labor. We've known for years that we had a problem with labor in the industry. The industry didn't have access to labor, didn't have access to the right kinds of labor. And so in the 1960s, Canada embarked on what was then a stopgap measure to address a short-term labor shortage, which was to allow temporary foreign workers into our country. 60 years later, we are structurally dependent on that. And they're not great jobs for many people. There's lots of families from Mexico and the Caribbean that have longstanding, warm, productive relationships with Canadian farmers, and that's great. And they're not very good jobs. And Canadians don't want those jobs because they're not very good jobs, because they don't pay very much, and they're really long hours, and they're really hard, and all the stuff your audience knows about.
Yeah.
And so it's not really surprising that emerges then as a weakness now. And the same thing, we've known that hyper concentration within the meatpacking industry was vulnerable, that we've got too few plants doing too much of the work. And then unsurprisingly, that becomes a problem. So there's been these bottlenecks that have opened up that have essentially revealed things we already knew were problematic before this.
In a way, it's amplified those issues for us, hasn't it? It's really brought them to the surface where we were able to just kind of coast along and ignore them for so long.
Yeah, so if there's a silver lining, and it seems a bit weird to be talking about silver linings, but maybe we should dwell on the things we can learn out of this, is that maybe we can develop fix some of these problems. Be open and transparent and say, look, we did a lot of stuff right, but there's a few areas where we need a different approach at. And I'd say hyper concentration in the meatpacking industry, the dependency on foreign labor, the brittleness versus the efficiency of the just-in-time supply chain would be another one that I would put up there. We're in for a century of disruptions, whether it's climate change or whether it's one angry tweet away from closing borders. We know we need to be more resilient as a system.
So do you think that we need to change our concept or our definition of efficiency in light of this? You mentioned the word resiliency. Do we need to replace efficiency with resiliency in terms of the catchphrase for a goal for the industry?
I was thinking to one of the webinars that we've all been listening to lots of in the last few months, and it was a group of farmers, And I don't know, it might have even been one that the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute organized back in April. And I can't remember who was speaking. It might have been someone like Keith Curry from the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. Maybe I've got that wrong. But the person, whoever it was speaking and was saying, we need to change the paradigm from just-in-time food systems to a just-in-case food systems, where we create a food system designed on needing to be prepared for things just in case bad stuff happened. And there's a trade-off there. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, nothing comes for free. And, one of the reasons we have these great big abattoirs is they're very, very economically efficient. If we're going to go for more resilience, that will cost money, and that will probably have to mean higher food prices, and that might mean worse food insecurity for low-income Canadians. So we have to be very cognizant and open about these kind of trade-offs so that we can maybe develop other policies to help manage or mitigate the trade-offs.
Just turning our attention to the global situation, I mean, has this, some have referred to this as being something that's a great leveler, and others have said that this absolutely accelerates or exasperates the discrepancies between the first and the third worlds. I mean, what do you see happening on a global stage when it comes to the impact this has had on both poverty and food security?
Well, I think the impact that COVID and the pandemic has had on global food security is frankly terrible. I'll start at the Canadian level, but then we'll easily segue up into the international. And in the Canadian context, we know that food banks are run off their feet. They have seen an unprecedented spike in demand for their services. And ironically, food banks, just like the temporary foreign worker agricultural policy was a stopgap measure to help address a short-term problem 60 years ago and got stuck around. Food banks were designed in the 1980s to help manage a short-term spike in food insecurity.
Right.
And again, we've become structurally dependent on them. And that's an irony and a bit of a rabbit hole. The point is that food banks have seen incredible increase in their demand. And recent statistics in Canada suggest that we've gone from about 1 in 10 Canadians to 1 in 8 Canadian families that are food insecure as a consequence of the unemployment and lost wages. A terrible, terrible situation. At the international level, the same thing. And about May, when the head of the United Nations World Food Program spoke to the US Congress, if I'm not mistaken, and said that the world faces famines of biblical proportions as a result of the fallout from the food crisis, and probably a doubling of hungry people on the planet, largely driven by not agricultural problems, but by the economic costs of this that forced poverty up, have caused people to lose jobs, lost wages, and so it's really a very, very serious problem. So
it's driven people that were just on the cusp of crawling out of poverty into a lower middle class or middle class right back into poverty. Is that what I understand?
Exactly. And in Canada, we've got a society and a safety net and a governmental response that has taken the edge off of it. And so the federal government in Canada, for instance, put $100 million into charities and food banks and organizations that deliver emergency food relief. And then just quite recently, there was the Minister of Agriculture and Food, Mary-Claude Bibeau, announced the way of the program where the federal government was going to buy food that farmers couldn't sell and get that into the emergency food system. So that's taken the edge off of the problem. But if you're in Rwanda, or if you're in somewhere, have access to that kind of governmental support. And so this is where we see dramatic rates of increased food insecurity, hunger, and then that affects an entire generation, right? Because if you when you're a baby or immediately before birth, when your mother's pregnant with you, if you don't get adequate nutrition or your mother doesn't get adequate nutrition, that first 1,000 or so days from conception to your kid's second birthday is critical in the cognitive development of a person. And so, a couple of years of bad food insecurity can actually set an entire generation back. And this is a desperately serious situation that we as a global society, I think, face.
So what can change? Like, we talk about what should change, but how do we go about changing that? I mean, what's needed to, is it an international agreement? Is it a commitment from countries like Canada to continue to support food aid? What are the necessary steps to looking into this?
Well, we have to talk about different scales, of course, right? And say within the Canadian federal government, start with the Canadian federal government as a scale, I think we need a big investment in agriculture, agricultural technology. I think we want to shorten supply chains, especially in fruits and vegetables that we really, really import most of our food. I think there are technologies that are just beginning to mature around the areas of controlled farming and things like that, really exciting for us. And I think we need to be training our young people to get into farming. And I think that Canada could be a global leader in this sort of area of ag technology and innovation. And I get really excited about that. Actually, that's the thing I'm most excited about right now. So that's one thing. I think we have to be looking very carefully at our role internationally as an employer of agriculture, foreign workers, but then also what that extended responsibility means to the families that depend on coming to Canada for those jobs. Because, I mean, we might not be able to get Canadian youth to do those jobs, but the families that come from Latin American Caribbean depend on the money they earn in Canada to support families back home, and that's called remittances. So we have to be thinking about, perhaps as part of our international development agenda, how to help families that are dependent on Canadian agricultural jobs find good quality alternative livelihoods. And that means probably using our international development efforts and investing in those communities to help with that. Well, then I think that maybe at a local level, we should be working hard to support local farmers and things like that. And here I think the ideas of this sort of circular economy that are becoming very popular and talked about a lot in the last 2 years, where we try to explicitly identify the waste streams of the economy, waste, and repurpose that in sort of closed loop agricultural systems at a regional level. I think that there's some merit to those sort of ideas that might be applicable at a very local level in Canada. And that sort of portfolio is where I would go.
You know, I keep thinking here in Canada, we have a tendency to become complacent because we really do live in a land of plenty. But when you look at the impact this has had on our labor situation, particularly to the people coming to Canada to help with our horticulture, which is the most nutritious foods that we get, the fruits and vegetables are the most nutritious foods Canadians depend on. We actually could see producers unable to produce because they can't get access to labor. And yet, you know, when we are supplying those jobs, we're actually supporting the economies in those countries as well, because those remittances are going back. To me, it just kind of underscores that we're all connected. The solutions here are not going to be a made in Canada solution. They're going to have to be with all of these factors taken into account.
Yeah, no, there's so much to think about in what you just said there. So thanks. So on one point, yes, this isn't just a made in Canada. This is a global thing. And so I think we need to be relying on organizations like the United Nations. And here I just highlight that I think it's next September. There is a UN Food Systems Summit being planned. And I'm very keen to see that the Canadian voice is present in the agenda of the UN Food Systems Summit, because this is a place where at the highest level globally, these issues are going to be discussed. You're right. We face this irony that, you know, we do phenomenal livestock and phenomenal grains and oil seeds and legumes, and we export those, and that Canada is really, really known for. My own grandfather was a horticultural farmer in Niagara. There's really a lot going on that farm anymore. A lot of horticulture has gone out. And you're right, we import most of our fruits and vegetables from California. And those are the products we need to be eating more of. We know that from nutrition. Every nutritionist says, eat your fruits and vegetables. And so we need to redouble our efforts, I think, in the fruit and vegetable categories, the horticulture, the greenhouses. And there, I think, you know, we should be world leaders in that again. And I don't think we are right now, and that for me is a shame, but also an opportunity. So I would like to see us do that. And then again, to reiterate my former point, I think we have to take our energies of building up our hort industry or fruit and vegetable industry again, which will probably involve a lot of automation, will probably get us off of hard, repetitive hand labor that we use the temporary foreign worker program for. And we have to direct some of our energies into helping those countries that are dependent on those jobs actually survive if we end up automating, building our own fruit and vegetable industry, and recognize that we have a responsibility to the folks that come to Canada as well.
So what gives you hope out of this? It's kind of a big, messy situation, but you've mentioned a couple of opportunities, but what keeps you encouraged about what lies ahead?
Well, I think like all of us, we're all a little depressed and kind of anxious right now. Certainly I'm looking at what the fall is going to look like for my school age kids. And I'm thinking, oh dear. And it's hard to get a spring in my step these days, but I think we're all in that boat. So to end on a positive note, I actually think that this is a tremendously exciting time in agriculture. I mean, for 4 years ago, I think it was, the federal government identified agriculture as an engine of economic growth. I think agriculture should be seen as the cornerstone of a green recovery platform for Canada. I think agriculture can and should, with technological innovation, turn from a source of greenhouse gases to a absorber of greenhouse gases. I think we can do that. I think we can shorten our supply chains. We can repatriate our food systems. And in doing that, repatriate our fruit and vegetable systems in particular, And in doing that, I think we can probably be a global leader, not only in the production of healthy, safe, and sustainable food, but the technologies and the technological, maybe I get a little nationalistic, but it sort of bugs me that Singapore, the Netherlands, Israel are seen as the world leaders in ag technology. And I think we should be in that club, and we should be very deliberately and determinedly putting ourselves in that club. And so that, moving towards that sort of vision is what puts a spring in my step in these somewhat bleak times.
Well, Evan, thank you very much for taking the time to join me here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And hopefully we can continue these conversations. Evan Fraser is director of the Arrell Institute at Guelph University. I'm Laura Rance.